All right, thank you so much again for sticking with us. This time we're going to be talking about the purpose of work. I have a different panel with me this time. I want to introduce them. All of them are in the either employer or startup founder space or investing in startups and various founders as well. First up, I want to introduce Gosia Karas, who's the director of the SoftBank Opportunity Fund, which only invests in Black, Latino, or Native American founders. Then Amir Hemmet, who runs Welcome Tech, which is building a digital platform to connect immigrants to the services that they need here in the US. And then Anushka Mehta, who runs the ESG fund of the HSBC and is focused in investing in women-led businesses, among others. And then Sucheon Dong, who runs Multitudes, focusing investing in diverse founders. Anushka, let me start with you. I want to talk about priorities, because after George Floyd was murdered back in 2020, so many companies came out and said, look, our priority right now is investing in, for example, Black-owned businesses. Certain companies said that they would dedicate X% of their shelf space to products run by Black companies, Black-owned companies. Other corporations came out and said, we want to make sure that our workforce is much more diverse. We're committed to hiring X percentage of employees from diverse backgrounds. It sort of feels now as though, given what is happening in the economic environment, especially here in the US, that is no longer a priority. Obviously, we're dealing with inflation. We're also dealing with, obviously, linked to that, the rising cost of living crisis. There's the Ukraine war. Gas prices were very, very high for quite a while in this country as well. It sort of feels as though that is no longer a priority. How can we make sure that that is still at the forefront of the company mindset when they think about hiring and also investing? And also, how can we hold companies to account based on the commitments they made back in 2020?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for the question, and thanks for having me here today as well. So look, maybe starting with sort of the glass half full perspective to start with. Look, I think since we've been having these conversations around gender lens finance since sort of 2018, 2019, and certainly since 2020 as well, I think we've really seen some progression in the arc of this conversation, right? From historically, it was seen as sort of more of a peripheral and maybe even philanthropic conversation to have. And now when we talk to companies on this, they're starting to really think about how can their business really push diversity and inclusion, how can it push representation, and it is becoming part of their sort of broader ESG strategy. So I'd say from that perspective, we're seeing a huge amount more engagement, and for me, that's hugely encouraging. The rhetoric is changing, and I'm really pleased to see that. However, I'm also a realist, and when we look at the data, it paints a hugely different story, and frankly, this is what keeps me up at night, right? The fact that only 2.4% of venture capital dollars are going to female founders. I think, Dane, you mentioned the statistic, right, around sort of 1% of venture capital dollars going to Black founders, and when you look at Black women, it's even worse. It's 0.34%. That is 1/3%, and I think we can all agree that those statistics are frankly horrifying. And so you are saying, right, what is it that we can be doing to make sure that this is still front and center of everything we think about, right? This shouldn't be just a flash in the pan, but we should be really thinking about this. How can this really drive sustainable businesses going forward? And we need to make sure this stays sort of front and center of that conversation. Diversity, there is data that shows that diversity yields good results, better results, in fact, and we need to keep sort of hammering that home. I think there is a huge amount that we can also do collectively, right, across our organizations to ensure that we're keeping this agenda right at the top of the list. In terms of how we can hold companies accountable to this, I think there are a number of ways in which we can do this. Certainly from a finance perspective, and what we've been seeing at HSBC is the emergence of a market called sort of the sustainability-linked market as one example. And what that effectively is holding terms that we extend on capital conditional on companies achieving specific goals and targets. And we're starting to see a huge amount of that around representation. So take, let's shoot for the stars here, 50% of women in leadership by the end of this year. If you meet that target, you see a reduction in the price you pay. If you miss the target, you see an increase. So really seeing that sort of bottom line implication for not getting there on these initiatives that you commit to. So that's just one example.
Gosia, what do you think of that? Do you think there should be that kind of accountability, bottom line accountability for companies meeting these targets when it comes to diversity?
That's definitely one of the ways to hold companies accountable. I can speak from SoftBank's perspective, given we were actually one of those people who, in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, decided to do something. And our thinking was around, we want to do what we know how to do best, and we are investors, so let's invest. And we launched SoftBank's Opportunity Fund in June 2020 with exactly that premise. Let's invest exclusively in minorities, in Black, Latino, Native American founders, and let's drive returns that way. Because our thinking was not purely around this is the right thing to do, and we want to use our resources and our skill sets to do the right thing. But we were also very strongly focused, and we continue to be, on making this a for-profit effort. So our kind of internal accountability came from the fact that we are in the business of making money. Mm-hmm. And it is a great source of fantastic founders whom we can help grow, whom we can help build their companies with our capital, whom we can partner with in the long run. And Amir is one of the founders that we are very lucky to have in our portfolio. And that has been the mindset. So when we launched the business, when we launched the Opportunity Fund, we started investing right away, finding those fantastic founders and fantastic companies, and writing checks. And 2 years later, we are actually 74 portfolio companies in, across stages all the way from seed to growth stage. I personally focus on Series B and C, which we generally evaluate as growth stage companies. So for us, it was very much driven from the heart of what we do, and very much commercially focused.
Suchian, Goshen brings up a great point, that when you hire a much more diverse workforce, this is not just a nice thing to do. It's not just about checking a box and filling a quota. This actually has real consequences for a company's bottom line. Explain how.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think it's hiring not just at the company level, but also thinking about diversity at the fund level. Because if you think about the funding stack and what we can do to change the paradigm of who gets money today and who will get money tomorrow, it's not just it's a question of not just how do we fund more diverse founders as a bottom line initiative, right? But it's how do we get more diverse funders in place? How do we get more diverse funders managing larger pools?
People writing the checks.
Exactly. And because research has shown that small funds outperform large funds, emerging managers outperform established managers, diverse leadership outperforms homogenous leadership, right? And early stage focused funds outperform growth. And so if you put all those things together, I think one of the ways that we can really start thinking about changing the dynamics of who gets to create the future in the future is by thinking beyond just, well, how do we fund the founders, right? But how do we fund the funders?
And yeah, I was going to actually ask you a question. Go ahead.
Maybe it's a good segue to further questions, which is, let me just make this statement. If you're not hiring for diversity in this country, there's something wrong with your hiring practices, meaning you are not attracting the best of the best and the most talented people in the market. I think it's time we sort of shift the conversation a bit and realize who are at the top of the talent pools across categories, across industries. In the US, we're a nation of immigrants. We have children of immigrants at the top of every talent pool. So I think the question has to be, what is wrong with your hiring practice? What is wrong with your recruiting capabilities if you're not able to attract the best of the best in talent? Because that's really what the conversation is. The George Floyd tragic incident, all it did was create further will, right? Mm-hmm. But in terms of that will turning into action and results, that's what's missing. And I think it's more a question of sort of what's the issue with these companies who are not able to attract the best of the best in the talent pools.
It's interesting because you largely deal with the Hispanic community. And one of the things that is most important, I think, in having a more diverse workforce is that you get to mirror, you get to represent the companies or the sort of people which you serve. Your company has to be a mirror that represents the people that you serve. That allows you to do much better business, correct?
Sure. So what you're highlighting is at Welcome Tech is we're building the future of immigration. We're helping to connect immigrants to the information and services that they need. And when you talk about the largest and fastest growing population here in the US, it is the US Hispanic immigrant population, largest immigrant population in the world. And so what you're highlighting is that we're talking at a time where industries are getting crushed with turnover and retention, just annihilated. We're talking 100, 200% turnover in many industries. And the challenge is, are these companies set up to be able to not only attract, recruit, but also retain this important talent, right? So the tools have to be there, both to access the audience as well as to retain them. And I would add, the economics have to be there as well, right? We're talking about a lot of stats here. I think the number one stat needs to be about the ROI around hiring this demographic and having this demographic at work. I'm talking to employers all the time. They'll take any warm body that they can right now, right? Doesn't matter what they look like, but they cannot access this demographic who's looking to work and wants opportunities because they don't have the tools to be able to reach them. The standard tools for recruiting, they're not working effectively. The standard tools for benefits and retention are not working. So who's innovating, who's building to be able to address this challenging issue for employers?
You talk about statistics. One statistic that I find frightening is the fact that companies that have at least one black founder, startups that have at least one black founder only receive 1% of the funding available. Why is that? I mean, I know why I think that is, but is there more to the story than meets the eye? Can anyone tackle that?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. And so from where I sit, we invest in early stage founders that are diverse, right? Women, people of color, people who use their unique lived experiences to build what they want to see in the world. And I think the way that we get more Black people funded, more women funded, more people of color, underrepresented minorities funded, is that we need more people who are writing those checks who look like the founders they're trying to fund. Right? It's much easier to pitch to a VC who understands the problem on a personal level that you're trying to solve than somebody who thinks about it academically and says,
I don't really understand that.
Right. I haven't been an immigrant before. I don't really understand. I haven't had a language barrier before. I don't understand, right? And so to really, not even thinking, well, what happens 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead, but how do we change what the face of innovation looks like 20, 30 years ahead? We had to start now and start at the early stages. And again, really think about, okay, well, how do we get more women, people of color, Black people starting companies? Well, they have to know that there are funding sources, right, that are ready at the early stages to back their ideas.
Goshia, you're one of the funding sources. You write the checks for a lot of companies that are diverse, that are run by Black founders, Native American founders, Latino founders. There needs to be more diversity in the space that you're in, right?
Absolutely, and I completely agree and echo those points. It's very important to have folks on both sides of the table because when you can kind of more easily understand the problems that people are trying to solve, it's easier to get convinced, and everyone always has unconscious biases. So that's definitely very important. There is also the sheer component of who you are as an immigrant founder, oftentimes, or as a Black founder or as Latino founder. What we have seen is that the grit and the tenacity that comes, with certain level of really difficulties for many folks with accessing the capital, really builds strength and is very similar to the mindset that you are typically looking for in the entrepreneur.
I think that's a great point. Anushka, do you want to jump in? I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fantastic point. And I think the other thing that we really need to think about with this community specifically is absolutely access to capital, but it's also access to resources, networks, opening up opportunities, right? This isn't just there's the capital and that's the end of the story. There's a huge amount more that needs to go into that, right, to make sure that they're actually opening up that world for them. I also think that there's an argument to be made around sort of broader infrastructure for these groups as well, right? Access to healthcare, education, more topically, childcare. It is, access to capital is absolutely sort of the key problem to think about, but I think there are other pieces around that absolutely need to be addressed as well.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on that real quick. I think that, if we consider the pandemic as a forcing function in a lot of ways around consumer behavior and sort of where they're headed, I think the impending, or if we believe the recession is happening today, is also a forcing function, in particular for capital. Because if you're an investor in this room and you don't realize that people are really moving from their wants to their needs, and you need to invest behind those needs, I don't know what world you're looking at, because at the moment, people are focused on their needs, and people want solutions to real problems. And what we're talking about up here are real problems that the world is facing, and we need to put more capital behind that. We also need to see the wins as well. So investors need to see the ROI on that investment. I think I'm very fortunate to have the SoftBank Opportunity Fund involved in our company in terms of having the patience to build for a demographic that historically has not seen the capital that it requires, and also realizes that there's massive opportunity behind that.
And I mean, one of the other things that the pandemic has changed is, of course, we've talked about it so much, how we see work, with well-being front and center as opposed to the daily grind. People want much more flexibility at work. They don't necessarily want to be stuck in an office all day. Given all of that, how should employers, given that you are an employer, how should employers rethink hiring and retention in that kind of environment, do you think?
Yeah, well, one thing I find interesting is that there was all this talk during the pandemic of like distributed workforce and work from home versus work from office. In particular in the tech world, if you're a tech company, historically, you've been pretty flexible as it relates to kind of being in office or being at home. You're looking for people who get things done and drive results. And I think where we are today is, a world where we've got more tools to have distributed workforces. That should result in more access. If you're recruiting effectively, that should result in access to a more diverse team forces. So I would encourage investors to really investigate the ability of companies to deliver on that, because that's what's required to recruit the best of the best talent and to be able to scale effectively. We have a whole new world available to us where we can access talent anywhere in the world. That's really exciting for anybody who has the setup to do that. There are companies who are requiring in-office work. I think it's an interesting setup if you're thinking about it that way these days, but it's going to be a challenging one because the best of the best talent is available to you now, and you're not competing for them.
It's very interesting. I mean, and since we're talking about equity as well, most employers have been very honest and said that on-site employees, people who come to work every single day, who have face-to-face time with their bosses, are much more likely to get promoted. But it's women and diverse employees that need that flexibility. So employers also have to think about, in this environment, how to make sure there is equity when it comes to access to promotions and more opportunity. Because we only have 1 minute left, I want everybody, quick fire, to say in one sentence what their priority is. Anushka, let me start with you.
I think the more we can create change in what we do and thinking about our businesses and how we can drive that, the better. So I'd implore everyone to think about that and do more we can do together.
Gosha?
I think the more amazing people we can find to partner with, the better. And to the point that was previously made around building diverse teams so that they can actually drive that change and find those amazing people to partner with, the better.
Amir?
Using technology to build the future with diverse and very, very talented teams.
Shucha?
The way we create change faster is by using leverage, and the highest leverage thing that we can do is to fund companies who are designed differently today that go on to become really big.
Fascinating. Can we give our panel a round of applause, please? Thank you.